My name is Bilal Khan. Today I am 30 years old and I live in London, England, but I want to take you far away from here. Not just in space, but in time. I want to tell you about the moment when my childhood began to unravel, even though, at the time, I was just an 8-year-old boy with no idea of what was to come. It all started in 2003, in the city where I was born, Lahore, Pakistan. Lahore wasn't just a place on the map to me, it was my entire world. Every corner of the city had something magical about it. Mosques towered like guardians of the sky. Bazaars bustled with life as vendors shouted their offerings, and the call to prayer rippled across the rooftops like a sacred whisper. It was an ancient song that pierced the hot, dusty air and made my heart flutter. Our home was modest, made of mud bricks, with walls that breathed heat during the day and kept quiet at night. I lived there with my parents and my younger sister, Zanob. Zanob, or Zobi, as I called her, was my mirror and my adventure partner. She was only 5 years old, but her eyes were like mine. Big, dark, and full of questions. She laughed easily, a laugh that made even my mother forget how tired her hands were from washing clothes in the sink. Our backyard was small, shaded by an old neem tree. It was there that we spent our afternoons flying kites made of newspaper, betting on who could fly them the highest before the wind knocked them down. My father was a textile merchant. He had a shop in the bustling Liberty Market, always filled with bolts of shimmering silk and hand-dyed cotton. He was a man of presence, a neatly trimmed beard, a steady gaze, and a voice that sounded like a promise. "Bilal, you will carry the words of Allah," he would say, placing a strong hand on my shoulder with such pride that I felt as if I were already on the right path. My mother, more gentle, would stroke my hair as she whispered, "Be brave, my lion." I believed them. I believed them with all the faith I could muster in my small chest. And so, when they told me I would study at a madrasa to become a hafiz, a guardian of the Quran, I went with a heart full of hope. The madrasa was in a quieter part of town, a short rickshaw ride away. It was a place hidden behind high adobe walls. I remember first looking at the one-story building with its dusty courtyard, where boys like me ran around barefoot, some with wooden slates in their hands, others with their eyes wide open. There was a small mosque, and a room where more than 30 boys slept side by side on straw mats that creaked when we turned over at night. The smell of the place was a mixture of paint, sweat, and old incense. On the first day, we were greeted by Mulvi Rahim. He was dressed in a white robe, neatly pressed, his turban neatly wrapped, and his beard dyed with red henna. His eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, and his voice was so deep it reminded me of the azan echoing from the Badshahi Mosque. He held up my slate, solemnly read my name, and said, "Bilal Khan, you will shine here." My father, standing next to me, puffed out his chest with pride. My mother, her eyes brimming with tears, squeezed my hand one last time before leaving. I stood there alone, my shalwar kameez a little too loose, my heart pounding between fear and excitement. The days at the madrasa had a rigid cadence. We would wake before the sun, still shrouded in the darkness of dawn, to perform the Fajr, the dawn prayer. We would wash our hands, faces, and feet with the cold water from the courtyard, a cold shock that would wake us up completely. We would sit in rows on the dirt floor, each with our takti, the wooden slate on which we wrote the verses of the Quran, and begin to recite. The Surah Al-Fatiha echoed in unison, our childish voices mingling in a chorus of faith and effort. Sometimes a tear would escape a boy. Sometimes it was just exhaustion, but no one dared stop. In that place that should have been sacred, where I had expected to find light, I found shadows instead. The rigidity soon ceased to feel like discipline. The gentleness in Mulvi Rahim's eyes was a veil, and behind it was something else. The faith I had carried with me, pure, innocent, whole, began to shatter into pieces that not even time could easily mend. My trust was torn away silently, as if no one were watching. But Allah saw, I told myself. Allah saw everything. This is the story of how my innocence was lost. Not in a sudden accident, but drop by drop, like ink dripping from a sacred calligraphy. It is also the story of how fear took root in me, and how, in the very place where I should have learned to love faith, doubts arose within me that I never imagined I had. Malvi Rahim walked among us with slow, steady steps, his cane tapping the ground like a clock ticking out of time. With each tap, a silence spread among the boys. He passed, occasionally stopping behind someone, correcting in a deep voice the incorrect pronunciation of a sacred word. "Allah hears every syllable," he would say, his hand resting on my head, warm and heavy, as if the weight of faith could be transmitted through touch. And I believed. I tried my best. My tongue stumbled over Arabic words that I still did not fully understand, but my desire to please him, to be worthy, was greater than any difficulty. At night, after long hours of recitation and memorization, we would sit on the rough cement floor with bowls of watery kheer and chunks of roti. Our sticky fingers blended into the darkness as we chewed in silence. The only music came from the constant creaking of the ceiling fan, as if something was always about to break. The city seemed distant, like a dream from another world. I missed Zobi's laughter piercing the air in our courtyard, the songs my mother would hum to lull us to sleep. But I told myself it was a sacrifice. It was the price I had to pay for Jannah. Paradise. I had to endure it. At first, Malvi Rahim was kind. Sometimes, after I recited well, he would give me extra dates or stroke my head and smile. "You are special, Bilal," he would whisper, and I would feel my cheeks heat. Not with fear, not yet, but with pride. Being seen by him felt like a gift. The other boys were like brothers. Some laughed, others cried quietly at night, their faces turned to the wall, their bodies shaking. I didn't understand why at the time, but there was something in the air. Something unspoken but felt, like the fine dust that settled on our taktis, slowly covering everything. The first time it happened was about a month after I arrived. It was a muggy, moonless night, and the fan had stopped. I was half asleep, my eyes heavy, when I felt his hand on my shoulder. A light squeeze, but it woke me up instantly. His voice was low, almost soft. "Come on, Bilal, let's practice a little." I did as he said. I trusted him. I stood up barefoot, feeling the cold of the floor seep into my bones. We walked to the small room behind the mosque, a dimly lit room where a single bulb flickered in the ceiling. He closed the door. My stomach churned. A vague, nameless feeling began to grow inside me. "Be quiet," he said, and in that moment his eyes were no longer kind. There was something else there, a strange urgency, a heavy breathing that confused me. What came next? I can't describe it clearly. It's like a bad dream, blurry at the edges, but with moments as sharp as knives. A nameless pain, a new fear, one I'd never felt before. He whispered that it was our secret, that Allah would punish me if I told. He said my family would be ashamed. He touched my face and said, "You're a good boy." And I, even though I was shaking, even though I was crying, just nodded. Because that's what he wanted, and because I didn't know what to do. I staggered back to my corner, where the mat waited for me like a plank in the sea. The other boys were asleep, their slow breathing like loud drums in my ears. I curled up, hugging my knees, and tried to pray. But the words came out wrong, stuck, disjointed. Something inside me had broken. It happened again, always at night, always in that room, always with that voice disguised as sweetness during the day, praising my recitation, calling me special. And always with that other voice at night, the one that cut like a blade, cold, precise. Little by little, I stopped eating. The roti would fall apart in my hands before it reached my mouth. I started walking, staring at the floor. I no longer smiled. The other boys understood. Some looked away, others whispered to each other. One of them, an older boy named Aif, gave me a mango one afternoon. His eyes were sad. "Stay strong," he said. But he didn't explain. Maybe he knew. Maybe I had been through this before. But we couldn't talk about it. It was as if the walls were listening. I wrote letters to Zobi. Simple, short, untruthful letters. I told her I was learning, that I was happy, that the Madrasa was good. My mother would read to her at home, and I would pretend that was enough. Shame was a huge stone on my chest, heavier than the Quran I carried every day, heavier than the cane Malvi Rahim used to hit us when we forgot a verse. My prayers changed. I still knelt on the carpet, my forehead pressed to the floor, but I felt nothing, just emptiness and questions. Where was Allah? Why couldn't he see? Why couldn't he make me stop? I recited Surah Al-Asr in a mechanical voice, my heart far away. I saw Malvi Rahim leading the prayers, and I felt angry. Angry at how loud his voice was, at how others bowed before him, blind, at how my own father called him a holy man. At that moment, I realized my faith was slipping through my fingers, and I didn't even know how to hold it back. I wanted to run. I ran to the streets of Anarkali, through the alleys crowded with fruit vendors and tailors, and hid under the cool shade of the neem tree in our courtyard. I wanted to find Zobi flying a kite with her arms raised, her smile wide, and whisper everything in her ear. Tell her every detail. Let out the scream that was stuck in my throat, but I couldn't. Fear grabbed me by the ankle and pulled me back. Fear of hell, which I believed was real and burning. Fear of my father's wrath, whose honor was as fragile as glass. Fear of my mother's tears, which I couldn't bear to see. So I stayed, day after day, my slate smudged with ink and sweat, my heart stained with a pain I could not name. One day, during the recitation of Surah Al-Nas, my mind froze. The words disappeared from my memory like leaves blown away by the wind. I trembled. I felt the shame, even before the stick touched my skin. The sharp sound of the blow made the boys around me gasp. Pain shot through my fingers like fire. "Concentrate, Bilal," Malvi Rahim shouted, his eyes hard as stone. I just hung my head, my eyes wet. Later, he called me into the courtyard. His slap was quick, but his fingers were slow to leave my shoulder. "You can do better," he said, his voice low. And I nodded, my throat tight, hating every second of it. Hating myself for still wanting to please him, hating him for everything he did to me, and for how he still managed to smile throughout the day as if nothing had happened. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, counting the turns of the fan that creaked as if it had its own heart. I remembered Zobi, the blue kite she made for me out of wrapping paper, the way she ran with her hair flying. I whispered her name in the dark, like a prayer, like a request. By the time the first year was over, I was no longer the same boy who had arrived with eyes full of faith. I was just a shadow. My body was thin, my shoulders hunched. My hands were shaking from writing and praying, and from hiding the pain. My parents came to visit me. I remember my mother's hug, warm, tight. She looked at me tenderly, saying, "You're growing so tall, my son." But there was something in her eyes, a twinge of doubt, a question she didn't know how to ask. My father, as always, was firm, proud. He spoke to Malvi Rahim as if he were speaking to a sage. "Bilal is a star," Rahim said with that wide smile that chilled my blood. My father smiled, satisfied, as if he had won a bet. I just stared at the ground. Shame burned inside me like a fire that would not stop growing. When they left, I sat in the courtyard alone. Dust clung to my wet cheeks, and once again I wrote to Zobi, "I miss you. I'm trying to be nice." That was all I could say. I didn't write about the room, or about the nights, or about the touches. How can I explain this to someone who still sings to her dolls? How can I destroy the image my parents had of me, of the place they chose with so much love and faith? The madrasa was my world now, a world without windows, just high walls, locked doors, and the repetition of prayers that gradually lost their meaning. The sounds of Lahore, the rickshaws, the vendors shouting pani bottle, the azan echoing between the houses, seemed increasingly distant, like a memory from another life. I recited the Quran with precision, my voice firm, but empty, soulless, and Malvi Rahim kept looking at me, always looking. As if every word I said was his, I prayed night after night for it all to stop, for Allah to see me, for Him to do something. But the nights kept coming, the door kept closing behind me, and the faith that had once given me light began to fade, slowly, like a lamp that burns down until it turns to smoke. I wondered, why doesn't Allah hear me? Why did He let this happen? The boy who dreamed of heaven, who wanted to be a hafiz, no longer knew if he wanted to live anymore. Years later, I left the madrasa. I was 12 years old. I was no longer a child. The shadows had spread inside me like ink spilled on white paper. The purity of the boy who had come there had dissolved. Malvi Rahim had left, transferred to another city, but he was still with me, in my nightmares, in my empty prayers, in the moments when my soul cried out for help and no one would hear. I returned home. I slept under the shade of the neem trees again. But home no longer felt the same. Or maybe it was I who had changed so much that everything seemed strange to me now. My father still prayed 5 times a day. My mother cooked nihari with loving hands. Zobi, now older, still laughed with her eyes lit up. But I was different. I carried a weight that could not be seen on the outside. A secret so big that it crushed my chest. A secret that made me doubt the mosque, the Quran, and even God. This is the story of how pain ate away at me. How faith turned to anger. How I began to see the lies behind the sermons. How the boy who once wanted to be a guardian of the sacred word came to hate the religion that destroyed him. Our house in Anarkali seemed untouched by time. The mud brick walls still absorbed the sun's heat, as if to save it for the cold nights. The courtyard, covered in a fine layer of golden dust, was the same one where, years ago, Zobi and I had flown kites made of newspaper and rice paste. She was 9 now, taller, livelier, her braids bouncing with every step as she chased the sparrows. "Bilal, catch one," she would shout, with the pure joy of someone who still believed the world was good. I tried to smile back, but my lips were stiff, immobile, as if they had forgotten how to do it. My father continued to work long hours in his fabric shop in the Mercado da Liberdade. He would come home with bolts of silk on his shoulders and stories of customers that stretched on like soap operas. "Bilal, one day this shop will be yours," he would say, stroking his neatly trimmed beard, his eyes shining with anticipation. I nodded, but inside I cringed. I was beside him, yes, but not in my heart. My thoughts were trapped in another time, another place. My mother noticed. She always noticed. Her hands would stop in the middle of counting money or cutting vegetables, and she would watch me with that silent, heavy gaze. "What's wrong, my lion?" she would ask tenderly, waiting for me to say something. Anything. But I would just shake my head, unable to find a lie good enough to hide my shame. How could I tell her that I had let it happen? That I hadn't screamed? That I had kept quiet? That I hadn't managed to escape? The madrasa was a ghost. I could be 1,000 miles away from it, but it still lived within me. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night, my calves drenched in sweat, and Malvi Rahim's whisper haunting my ear. "Don't talk, Bilal." I would get up slowly, go to the window, and look up at the star-studded Lahore sky. I would try to pray, I really did. But the words of Surah al-Fatiha seemed to stick to my tongue as if they were made of stone. I stopped saying the Fajr prayers. Instead, I would go out into the courtyard, kneel silently and pretend that I had already prayed. My father never noticed. But my mother? She frowned more and more. Now I was in a public school, a worn concrete building with peeling paint and children's voices echoing in the hallways. The teachers slurred their speeches and the boys ran, shouted, fought. I hid under a banyan tree during recess, my untouched lunch on my lap, my eyes always on the floor. I was good at studying. Math, Urdu, science, because the books didn't ask questions. They didn't look at me, they didn't suspect, they were safe. But avoiding the mosque was more difficult. Every Friday my father took me with him to the neighborhood mosque. The green dome gleamed in the sun, and the courtyard filled with men of Kurtantat, moving like a single wave. The imam's voice boomed from the loudspeakers, sermons about obedience, about the fires of hell and the rivers of milk in paradise. I knelt with everyone, my forehead touching the carpet, but my heart was 1,000 miles away. Every word the imam said hurt me. I heard Malvi Rahim in every intonation, saw his face hidden among the bearded men. Every time someone said Amen, a lump tightened in my throat. One day, outside the mosque, I saw a group of boys from the Madrasa. They were wearing shalwar kameez dirty, their eyes hollow with exhaustion and hunger, reaching out for coins. My body froze. A shock went through me like a lightning bolt. Suddenly I was back in that courtyard, hearing the crack of the bat, feeling the thick air of that room. My father handed me a rupee. "Give it to them, Bilal," he said. My hands were shaking. I dropped the coin as if it were burning and ran. I didn't hear his calls. I just ran. Zobi was in the courtyard, drawing henna patterns on her hand. When she saw me, her eyes widened. "Why are you scared?" she asked with an innocence that tore me apart. I lied. "I'm not," but my voice cracked. And before I could collapse, she stood up and hugged me tightly, her small, warm arms wrapped around my tense body. I held her back, tight, silently promising that she would never know, never, that I would protect her from everything that had once destroyed me. Shame followed me like a shadow, fused to my body. I walked the streets of Lahore with it by my side. The bazaar was bustling, vendors shouting chai garam, women in burqas negotiating colorful bangles, the smell of samosas frying in the hot air. I walked beside my mother, carrying the basket of vegetables. People greeted her with respect. "Assalamu alaikum, my friend." And she smiled, with that same old sparkle. But I could feel the stares. I felt like everyone knew. Like my body bore marks that their eyes could see. Like the shame had become visible, printed on my skin like the shadow of a sin that was never mine. I could see Mulvi Rahim's face in the crowd, even though I knew he was long gone. My heart raced just thinking about him, an invisible weight that followed me wherever I went. At home, I began pouring my thoughts and pain into a notebook hidden under my mattress. There I wrote down the words I didn't dare say out loud, the questions that consumed me. Why did Allah allow this to happen to me? Why did I feel so stained, so dirty inside? The pages were marked with smudged ink and dried tears, but those were the only truths I could reveal, the only place where my soul found some relief and sincerity. But hypocrisy was everywhere, creeping into my world like dust through a broken window. Our neighbor, Hafiz Sahib, a respected imam, had a soft, sweet voice during the call to prayer. But I once saw him taking money from a merchant, smiling mischievously and keeping it like a dirty secret. "It's for the mosque," he said, but I couldn't believe his shiny new motorcycle. My father spoke admiringly of him, calling him a man of Allah. I wanted to scream so he would hear about the men of Allah who hurt little boys in the shadows. At school, a teacher named Malvi Qasim taught Islamic studies. He carried a sharp cane and used his voice to command the class, but I could hear his whispered anger as he insulted a poor boy who couldn't afford his tuition, muttering that people like that are ruining Pakistan. I looked at him with clenched fists, a mixture of hatred and sadness burning inside me. This man was holding the Quran, but I felt he hated me for simply existing. My anger grew silently, hot and deep. Little by little, I abandoned prayers, hiding from the world when the call to An echoed through the streets. Once, my father caught me jumping the Maghrib and slapped me so hard that my tears burned more than the pain on my face. "You shame us, Bilal," he shouted. And my mother wept, clutching her veil in her hands. I stood silently, my face burning, and a cruel thought echoed in my chest. "You don't know what real shame is." Zanob stood in the doorway, watching with wide eyes, and I hated myself even more for scaring her, for feeling so weak. I began to run away at night, walking through the vibrant streets of Lahore, where the music of the qawwali mingled with the colorful neon lights. I would sit by the banks of the Ravi River with its dark, calm waters and throw stones into the waves, as if each stone could sink my pain. "Allah, where are you?" I would whisper to the stars, but they remained silent, indifferent. I was just a lost boy, too lost in a big city that didn't seem to care. Zanob was my light in this darkness. She would sit with me in the courtyard, books scattered around us, and she would ask me with shining eyes, "Bilal, what is the moon made of?" I would make up stories, silver thread, angel dust, and her laughter, so pure and loud, would make my heart beat faster, even if only for a moment. But she saw my hidden sadness. Her small hands touched mine, worried. "Are you sick?" she asked, and I lied, saying I was just tired. A special night arrived. Eid al-Fitr. We put on our new clothes, my blue kurta and her pink shalwar kameez. The neighborhood party was alive, the air sweet with biryani and roses, children running, men praying beneath colorful lanterns. I stood to the side, watching Hafiz Sahib laughing, his hands full of sweets. My stomach churned, and Zanob tugged on my sleeve, asking to dance. I twirled with her under the lights, her laughter a small escape from the darkness. For a few seconds, I was just the older brother she adored, not the broken boy who carried secrets. But soon, the darkness returned, silent and relentless. School became my only refuge, a place where I could just be smart, without shame or fear. I won a prize in math, a glossy book cover. My mother hugged me tightly, her eyes shining. "My lion," she said. I wanted to cry, to tell her everything, but my father's voice cut through my courage. Fine, but focus, Bilal. Faith first. I nodded, my throat tight, hating the word faith, hating the mosque, hating Mulvi Rahim. Until one day, a colleague named Imran sat next to me. I clearly remember that afternoon sitting under the shade of the banyan tree, its green leaves dancing slowly in the warm wind. Imran was quiet, with a tired look that seemed much too old for his age. His eyes were as deep and sad as mine. Suddenly he spoke softly, almost in a whisper. I was in a madrasa too. Bad things happened there. My heart stopped for a moment. My hands went cold. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to tell him everything, but fear tightened my throat, suffocating my words. I wanted to ask so I could tell him, but fear suffocated me, I confessed in a whisper. He just nodded, as if he understood everything without needing any further explanation. We never spoke about it again after that day, but those few words opened a crack in the heavy silence between us. A small sign that I was not alone. By the time I was 15, I'd grown up, my voice had deepened, my body had grown taller and stronger. But deep down, in my heart, I was still that 8-year-old boy, shivering in Mulvi Rahim's room, trapped in a nightmare from which it seemed impossible to wake up. These nightmares grew worse with time. His face grew clearer and clearer, his voice grew louder and more menacing, as if he had never left. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, my hands shaking, and rush to my notebook, where I would pour out all my anger in pages and pages of words. Allah did not save me, I wrote. The men who claim to speak for him are liars. On the outside, I hid it all very well. I smiled at Zanob, helped my mother with the chores, pretended to be fine. But on the inside, my faith had been extinguished, like a candle, blown away by the wind. The mosque, which had once seemed like a holy place, was now a prison. The Quran, which was supposed to be my guide, was an unbearable burden, something I could not bear. I dreamed of escaping Lahore, a place where everyone knew me, where every glance seemed to weigh on me like a judgment. I wanted to go to a new place where no one knew my past, where I could finally breathe without shame. But Zanob's laughter, my mother's soft voice, were anchors that kept me there, between love and hate for this house I called home. One warm evening, I stood in the courtyard beneath the neem tree that rustled softly in the warm breeze. The city was silent, the call to Isha prayer echoing distantly, hanging in the air like a veil. I could not move. My feet felt rooted to the ground. I thought of Mulvi Rahim, of Imam Hafi, of my father's prayers. And then a strange fire ignited inside my chest. It was not faith. It was fury, a fierce, piercing rage. I don't believe anymore, I whispered to the starry sky, the words falling like sharp blades, cutting through the chains that bound me. But the freedom I had hoped for did not come. In its place, guilt settled in, thick and suffocating like the heavy heat of Lahore. It whispered that I was lost, dirty, that Allah had abandoned me. I looked up at the stars, once my friends, and now they seemed strange, distant. I wondered if I would ever find the light again, or if darkness was all I had. When I turned 23, that silent anger turned into a fire that burned everything around me. In 2018, I left Lahore, thinking I could escape the shadows that had haunted me since I was a child. Karachi was a different city, a chaotic mix of sea, neon lights, and crowded streets. But my past was with me, a constant weight. Mulvi Rahim's abuse at the Madrasa, my father's silence, the shame that clung to me like dust. The streets and markets of Lahore were gone, replaced by the sound of the waves and the smell of the sea in Karachi. But inside me, nothing had changed. The guilt, the anger, the hatred for the faith that had let me down were still alive. I had stopped praying, stopped believing, but the world would not let me forget. This is the story of how, far from home, I found others like me, survivors of secrets that many tried to hide. How I discovered that my abuser was still out there, free to hurt others. And how my fight nearly cost me my life. But it is also the story of a dream, of hope, and of the man dressed in white who, against all odds, cracked the walls I had built around my soul. I left Lahore in the height of summer with a light backpack but a heavy heart. My father's slap, his harsh words, "We protect our honor," still burned inside me, a wound that would not heal. Zanob's face, pale with fear of the upcoming wedding, was what gave me the strength to leave. "I will come back for you," I whispered, hugging her tightly, feeling the soft touch of her braid against my cheek. My mother was crying, her hands clutching my clothes, but I could not look at her. I was afraid I would not be able to leave. My father remained silent, with that hard look that seemed to weigh more than any words. I could only turn my back and walk, letting the hope of the fogger slowly fade behind me. Karachi was my escape, my refuge, a chance to start over, to be someone new, far from the ghosts that haunted me. I got a job at a call center answering questions for foreigners in hurried foreign voices, a place where I could hide behind headphones and speak in unaccented English. But I soon realized that there was no escape from a secret that had become ingrained in my bones. Karachi was a noisy, chaotic jungle, much more intense than Lahore. The streets hummed with the din of rickshaws honking, packed buses cutting through traffic, and vendors shouting their offers of biryani, garam biryani. The air was a strange cocktail of sea salt, burnt diesel, and spices that stung the nose. I lived in a cramped apartment in Sadar, sharing the space with 3 other men. Our room stank of sweat, cigarette smoke, and cold coffee. The call center was in a towering, cold, glass and steel building where the air conditioning never seemed to ward off the fatigue. Here my voice was monotonous, repeating rehearsed phrases as my mind wandered to memories I didn't want to relive. My classmates were young, full of jokes about cricket, parties and girls, but I kept my distance, an invisible stranger among them. My only real companion was my notebook, hidden in my backpack, its pages already full, overflowing with anger, pain, and unanswered questions. Why does the sacred hurt? Why does Allah watch but not intervene? At night, as the city hummed outside, I wrote these questions in the dark, my hands shaking sometimes from the cheap whiskey I drank to try to calm my thoughts. The nightmares never stopped. Maulvi Rahim's face, with his heavy breathing, his cruel hands, invaded my dreams. I would wake up suffocating, screaming silently into my pillow, trying to drown out the horror. I would often climb to the roof of the building, where the lights of Karachi spread out like a sea of artificial stars. There I would hold the letters Zanob sent me, hidden inside my bag like a forbidden treasure. She wrote every month, her handwriting careful and impeccable, but the words brought more concern than comfort. Ami misses you, one read. Abu thinks you are ungrateful. My husband is kind, but I don't like being a wife. Zanob was only 14, and already trapped in a marriage my father had decided for her. My chest tightened as I imagined her fear and loneliness, so young, so alone. I wrote lies to her, to protect her from the truth. I'm fine, Zanob. You'll be fine. But I wasn't fine. I didn't even know if she would be able to stay. I wanted to save her, to break my silence, but I was still that scared boy in the madrasa, unable to speak. Karachi had its own mosques, their gleaming domes and the call to prayer cutting through the city noise like a knife. I avoided them, head down, looking away, as if I could also escape the sound that brought back everything I had lost. Then one night, at a tea stall near Clifton, I met Faisal. He was my age, with eyes that looked too tired for such a young face, carrying a shadow I recognized. He worked as a mechanic, his hands greasy and smelling of oil. We sat together drinking tea, the hot steam rising between us, the air thick with cardamom and low conversation. Have you ever been to a madrasa? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart raced. I nodded, my throat tight. Me too, he said, looking away. Bad things happen there. He didn't need to say anything else. I knew what he meant, and he knew I knew. We sat there in silence, the tea cooling in the cup, and something invisible but strong grew between us, a silent bond of shared pain. Faisal introduced me to other men, survivors like us, who were huddled in a cramped room in Liari, a neighborhood known for violence and the strong smell of fresh fish mixed with fear. Their stories were similar to mine, young men robbed of their childhood, betrayed by those who were supposed to protect them. Madrasa teachers, men with holy speeches who hid monsters in the shadows. One of them, Assad, was an older man, his beard already flecked with gray, and his voice trembled with more than age. It spoke of painful stories. He spoke in Pasha, heavy words about Maulvi Rahim, as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Another boy, my age, was sobbing softly, hiding his face in his hands, trying to stifle the pain that was too great to contain. I listened to it all, feeling the same anguish rising inside me, like a tide threatening to swallow me. We are not the only ones, Faisal said with a firm, almost fierce look. It is everywhere, but no one has the courage to speak it. That sentence cut deep. I thought of Aif, the boy from the madrasa, with his eyes so sad that they seemed to reflect an entire world of silent suffering. I thought of Imran, my schoolmate, and his silent confession, always hanging heavy between our conversations. The truth was more than I could bear, a hidden Pakistan, hidden behind whispers and prayers harboring dark secrets. And then I heard something that froze my blood. Maulvi Rahim. Faisal showed me an old newspaper, a small but sharp headline. Hafi competition in Multan, it said. Maulvi Rahim, the respected scholar, will be the judge. His face shone in my mind like a cold, menacing light. He is still teaching, Faisal said, his voice bitter, full of contempt. Every year, boys like us... My stomach turned, the tea stall spinning around me as my hand shook. He was free and praised while I bore his shame, and I knew many others did too. That night I drank until I could no longer stand. My notebook was open in front of me, pen-scratching pages filled with hate and despair. He is a monster, and they call him a saint. I screamed into the void, but only silence answered. Allah, where are you? I screamed to find God, to seek justice, to make him pay. But fear, the same fear that had silenced me when I was 8 years old, suffocated me like a black shadow. At the call center, the anger I had been holding in exploded. I argued with a colleague who was praising the clergy, his voice loud and harsh as thunder. They are all liars, I said, oblivious to the stares that surrounded me. Strolling through Sadr one day, I saw Maulvi Zafar preaching on a street corner, his white turban gleaming in the sun, his voice echoing with words of purity and faith. I knew him from whispered stories, a man who took bribes and had the same kind of horrible secret as the madrasa. I couldn't control myself. You're a fraud, I shouted, my voice shaking with emotion and fear as the crowd around me stopped and stared. His eyes narrowed. His followers began shouting, "Blasphemy! Blasphemy!" In unison, their voices like sharp knives. I ran, my heart hammering in my chest, the words and shouts echoing through the streets behind me. In Pakistan, a blasphemy charge was a death sentence. Angry mobs, wrongful arrests, anything could happen. I hid in my small apartment, hands shaking, knowing I had crossed a dangerous line. The next day, Zanob's letter arrived. His words were like daggers in my chest. I'm scared, Bilal. He's not nice anymore. I want to run away like you. I cried alone, looking at his smudged handwriting, and guilt crushed me. I had abandoned her, failed myself. I wanted to go back. I wanted to save her. But Lahore was an invisible trap, with my father's silence rising like a wall I could not cross. I drowned my anguish in whiskey, the fire burning in my throat, and wrote to her, "Wait for me, Zanob. I will find a way." But I had no plan, only anger and fear, a fear that grew like a looming shadow. In the call center, whispers began to circulate. Suspicious glances followed me. I knew, in that instant, that to survive, to protect Zanob, I had to leave Pakistan. Then one day Samuel appeared. He was a Christian, a Pakistani like me, with a kind smile and a soft accent. We had exchanged words about work, about cricket, but never about faith, never about what was weighing on our hearts. One evening, in the dining room, he poured me a cup of tea. He warmed his hand in the heat of the drink and said, looking into my eyes, "You're carrying something very heavy, Bilal." I shrugged, avoiding his gaze, but his kindness touched me in a way I couldn't explain. "Read this," he said, handing me a piece of paper on which were written words from the Bible. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." At that moment, those words were a whisper of hope in a place that seemed like nothing but shadow. I stared at those strange words, soft as water seeping into dry earth after a long wait. "Your God?" I asked, my voice rough, filled with suspicion and pain. Samuel smiled gently and replied, "It can be yours too, if you want it." I looked away, feeling my heart pounding wildly, a confused mix of repressed anger and restlessness. That night a dream visited me, a man dressed in white, his face hidden, his voice calm and steady. "Bilal, you are enough," he said, placing his hand on my shoulder. Unlike Malvi Rahim's heavy, frightening touch, this hand was light, warm, almost a relief. I woke up with my face wet, silent tears streaming down my face and my chest tight. I didn't know who this man was, but his words stuck to me, a faint whisper that challenged my anger. I kept the paper Samuel had given me inside my notebook, hidden, afraid to even read it again, afraid of what it might mean. I wasn't ready for a new God, not when the old one had abandoned me, not when Zanob still needed me, and most of all, not when Mulvi Rahim was still free and untouchable. But the dream persisted like a crack of light in the deep darkness. A silent question I couldn't ignore. I began filling out forms for a refugee visa, seeking a new start in London. My hands shook, not just with fear, but also with hope. The threat of blasphemy was real and constant. Malvi Rahim's followers already knew my name, my face. Faisal helped me with money, his eyes filled with sadness and strength. "Keep fighting, Bilal," he said. I nodded, carrying a huge guilt, the guilt of leaving behind not only him, but Zanob as well. I wrote Zanob my last letter from Pakistan. "I'm going far away, but I'll come back for you. Be strong, my star." I didn't tell her about the dream, the paper, or the fear that was suffocating me. I packed my suitcase, my notebook, Zanob's letters, and left Karachi behind. The sea shimmered behind me, and the city lights dimmed one by one as I walked away. I was running, from my past, from Pakistan, from Allah, but the man in white kept following me, his soft voice a promise I didn't yet know how to carry. And when I first arrived in London, I was 25. It was a strange, almost otherworldly city, full of gray skies, red buses, and a sense of freedom I had never experienced before. In 2020, that place became my refuge, away from the coal mines and noisy markets of Pakistan, away from Karachi and its threats. The scars left by Malvi Rahim, the traumas of the Madrasa, my father's cold silence, they were all still with me, like a lingering shadow. The hatred I felt for Islam burned like wildfire, destroying what was left of my faith. But London was different, cold, noisy, and above all, free. And in that strangeness, I found something I hadn't expected. A voice calling me by name, a light that penetrated my darkness. This is the story of how I began to stumble toward a new faith, how my sister Zab's courage gave me strength, how that man in white became more than a distant dream, and how I learned that healing doesn't erase scars, but makes them more bearable. London hit me like a cold wave, its streets always wet with rain, the smell of coffee, smoke, and damp stone in the air. I arrived in winter with my refugee visa stamped in my passport, my suitcase light but my heart heavy. Inside it were only a notebook, Zanob's letters, and a Bible, the paper with the verse Samuel had given me in Karachi. "Come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest." I still didn't believe in that God, not completely, but I held those words as a silent comfort, a gentle promise that fought against my anger. I live in a shared flat in East London, in an old brick building with stairs that creak with every step. My roommates are a vibrant mix of Somalis, Bangladeshis, and a quiet Afghan. The room smells of curry and a faint mustiness, and the window looks out onto a street where women in hijabs walk side by side with men in suits. A new and strange world for me. During the day, I work in a warehouse, packing boxes. My hands are numb from the constant cold, but my mind is always far away, stuck in memories that won't leave me alone. The nightmares wouldn't let me rest. Malvi Rahim's face, her heavy breathing, those hands that had left a lasting mark on me, all of it would pull me out of sleep, my loud sighs echoing in the darkness of the room. Sitting by the window, I watched the lights of London blurred by the rain, while I read Zanob's last letter. I'm scared, Bal. I want to run like you. She was only 14, trapped in an arranged marriage by my father. Guilt was overwhelming me. I had left her behind. I replied, the pen shaking in my hand. I'll help you, Zanob. Hang in there. But inside I was weak, drowning in the whiskey I was drinking to try to sleep, while my notebook filled with rage. Allah has abandoned me. Why trust in another God? The call to prayer did not echo through London, but its ghost lived within me, reminding me of the faith I had rejected, a shame I could not shake. The freedom of London was strange. I walked streets where no one knew me, where I could breathe without fear of being branded a blasphemer. But freedom did not heal me. I avoided mosques, their domes nearly invisible on the city skyline, there undistant through the speakers. Instead, I sought the Pakistani mystery in the White Chapel. The smell of the biryani and of the chaithat brought a taste of home, a bittersweet mixture of comfort and pain. I met Samuel again, my co-worker from Karachi, now employed at a nearby supermarket. He was older, his hair thinning, but his smile was still kind. Bilal, you did it, he said, hugging me with unexpected warmth. We eat nihari in a small restaurant, steam rising, and he asked, concerned, "Are you okay?" I shrugged, eyes on my plate, but his kindness tightened a lump in my throat. Samuel invited me to his church, a simple building in Hackney with brick walls and a faded sign. I declined at first, my voice harsh. I don't need another God. He didn't insist, just offered me tea, his hand steady and welcoming. Whenever you're ready, he said, and I looked away, feeling the paper in my pocket stir, that whispering verse I couldn't ignore. One Sunday morning, the rain drummed on my window. I put on my wet coat, my heart pounding, and went. The church was warm and crowded, the pews filled with Nigerians, Pakistanis, whites, voices rising in a strange, soft hymn. The pastor, a gray-haired woman, spoke of a Jesus who loved the broken, who bore their pain. I sat in the back, hands clenched as her words fell on me like stones, soft but heavy. I left before the end, my chest tight, but the hymn stayed with me, its melody following me through the London rain. The dreams became clearer. The man in white was no longer a shadow. Now he was like an open field, his face gentle, his voice calm. Bilal, I see you. I woke up, face wet, heart racing, the empty whiskey bottle on the floor. I didn't know who he was, but I knew he wasn't Malvi Rahim, not my father, not the Allah I prayed to as a boy. I took Samuel's paper, the ink a little smudged, and read it again. I will give you rest. I wanted to believe, but fear held me back, fear of another betrayal, another lie. I hid the paper in my notebook. My pages were now a mix of anger and questions. Who are you? Why now? I haven't prayed yet, but I whispered in the silence of the room. If you are real, show me. My voice cracked in the darkness when Zanob's letter arrived that spring. His words came like a miracle amid the chaos. I am free, Bilal. In that moment, the world seemed to open up a little more. I ran to Kayla's house in Lahore, where she was hiding, safe. Zanob was only 15, a girl who had managed to escape the marriage my father had forced upon her, and her strength shone like a flame that lit up my darkness. I cried there, a confusing mix of relief and guilt, because even though I hadn't been the savior she needed, she had found her own escape. With a shaky pen, I wrote back, "You're my star, Zob. I'm so proud of you." Her courage reignited something inside me, an urge to face what I had left behind, to strengthen myself for her, for both of us. At that moment, I told Samuel everything, about Zanob, about the Madrasa, about Malvi Rahim. My voice cracked the first time I spoke it out loud, as if to break a silence too old to face. He listened, his eyes brimming with tears, his hand firm on my shoulder, saying, "You are not alone, Bilal." I could only nod in response, tears streaming uncontrollably, as his words became the balm I needed for the wound I had carried for so long. It was Samuel who gave me a Bible, a simple one, with a worn cover and thin, almost fragile pages. I hid it under my mattress, along with my notebook, afraid of what the book might awaken in me. Little by little, during the silent nights in the warehouse where I worked, I would open the Bible and read. The words seemed strange at first, almost like distant parables, promises from a man who died for love. I read about Jesus, his healing hands, his voice calling out to the lost, and I felt something pulling me, a gentle but irresistible tide. I couldn't resist for long. The dreams began to come more vividly to me. The man in white, once a shadow, now had clearer contours, gentle eyes, and a voice that whispered, "You are enough." I would wake with my heart racing, and for the first time I would kneel beside my bed. Not in prayer, not yet, but whispering softly, "I don't know who you are, but I want to know you." It wasn't faith, not then. It was just a crack in the wall I'd built over the years, a small light I hadn't seen since I was 8. The church became my refuge then. Its hymns became softer, its people more real to me. I met Aisha, a Nigerian woman who prepared jollof rice for the community meals. She had a loud laugh and kind eyes. She told me she'd lost her son but found peace in Jesus. He carries what we can't carry, she said, holding my hand. I wanted to believe her. Pastor Mary, with her gray hair and quiet voice, would always come to me after church. What's holding you back, Bilal? She would ask me calmly, but I couldn't answer. My throat was tight, my shame and my fear kept me quiet. Still, I came back every Sunday, sitting a little closer to the altar each time. The hymns came in slowly, like water seeping through dry earth, and my heart began to open, fragile and slow. Summer in London brought its warmth with lush green parks and streets bustling with festivals. I walked down Brick Lane, past curry houses and colorful graffiti, where the strange mingled with the familiar. I saw Pakistanis gathered at the mosque, their white caps, their rugs spread out for prayer, and I felt a quiet sadness, a reminder of the boy I'd lost in those shadows. I wrote to Zanob, telling her a little about London, about the church. My words were careful. I'm finding something here, Zanob. Something good. I didn't mention Jesus yet, afraid she would think I was lost, afraid I would push her away. Her letters kept coming, full of hope. Kayla is teaching me to sew. I want to be free like you. I smiled as I read them, her courage mirroring my own, giving me the strength to carry on. The nightmares weren't completely gone, but they were milder. Malvi Rahim's face was beginning to fade into the fog of my past. The man in white grew stronger in my dreams. That day, I sat with Samuel, my voice shaky and low, my hands barely controlling my nerves as I told him about those nighttime encounters. It's Jesus, he said, his eyes shining with a faith I didn't yet have but wanted to pass on to me. He's calling you, Bilal. I nodded, feeling a weight in my chest that I couldn't explain. That night, I knelt on the cold floor of my room for the first time in years. My words were clumsy, barely above a whisper. Jesus, if you're real, please accept this pain I carry. At first, I felt nothing but silence, but then a faint warmth came. Small, like a hand resting gently on my chest. I wept, my face buried in my hands, not from shame, but from a hope I'd forgotten existed. I began reading the Bible more often, in the quiet hours of the warehouse, when the city seemed asleep and my roommates were already lost in their dreams. Stories that had been foreign to me came alive, parables of love, redemption, promises that I was not dirty or lost. I wrote in my notebook, for the first time, not words of anger, but of wonder and a little peace. He sees me, I wrote. Maybe I am enough. As autumn approached, I was no longer the same. I didn't feel cured, but I was in the process. I stopped drinking. The whiskey bottles disappeared from my room. My hands grew steady. I worked hard, every penny saved for a bigger dream, to bring Zanob to London, away from my dark past. The church became a safe haven, a place where Aisha's laughter, Samuel's comforting prayers, and Pastor Mary's calm sermons created a new kind of family for me. In a simple, intimate ceremony, I was baptized. The cool water touching my forehead felt small compared to the heat growing in my chest. I didn't tell Zanob about the baptism, not yet, but I wrote to her, I'm finding peace, Zab. Soon we will be together. I had not erased my scars. Mulvi Rahim, my father, the Madrasa, they were all still part of me, but now born by a God who saw me and loved me. On a cold night, in the light London rain, I looked out at the city lights, shining through the darkness, and felt for the first time in a long time a dawn within my soul. Fragile, yes, but true. A light I was willing to follow, wherever it might lead. At 30, I was brave enough to face strangers and tell them the truth I had been carrying for more than 2 decades. My name is Bilal Khan, I said, my voice firm and my heart open. I'm from Pakistan, but London is my home now, a city of constant rain, red buses, and a history I'm still learning to live with. I spoke of the dark room of the Madrasa, of Malvi Rahim's hands that stole my innocence, of the scars that forged my hatred of Islam, of running away and searching for a greater meaning, of my father's absence, of Zanob's pain, and of the fear that brought me to this gray city, where, at last, I found a God who saw me, a Jesus who called me to be enough. In the small room where I spoke, my voice no longer trembled. I shared my story, not to seek revenge, but to give hope to those, like me, who needed to hear that it is possible to find light even in the darkness. This is the story of how I gave voice to the silenced, found Zanob again, and how my faith made the scars more bearable, showing that grace is, in the end, stronger than pain. The London spring brought fresh air, parks blooming with flowers I had never seen before, and a different light in my white flat in Hackney. The windows let in a light that seemed to wash away the past. My work in the warehouse was going well. My hands no longer shook, and the whiskey bottles were gone forever. My Bible lay on the table, its worn pages a silent friend. The notebook that had once held only anger was now filled with prayers and poems and plans to help Zanob, to help others like us. Nightmares still haunted my dreams, but they were softer. Malvi Rahim's face no longer commanded my fear. His presence faded before the man in white, his calm voice saying, Bilal, you are enough. The church, with its brick walls and cozy pews, remained my anchor. The hymns lifted me, and the people there, Aisha, Samuel, Pastor Mary, became my new family. The letters from Zanob, my greatest treasure, continued to arrive, brightening my days with the hope that kept me going. At the age of 15, Zanob managed to escape that forced marriage, a silent escape that took her to our aunt's house in Lahore. There, hidden between familiar walls and shadows, she learned to sew, stitch by stitch, not only in fabric, but also in her own courage. Every day, she dreamed of a freedom that seemed too far away to achieve. Now, at 22, her voice reached me with the strength of one who fought. Her letters were full of fire, a flame that lit up even the darkest corners of my heart. She told me she was teaching girls to read, breaking the cycle of ignorance that had imprisoned so many of us. She spoke with a twinkle in her eye about her desire to one day go to London, to find a piece of the world there where she could be free. I, on the other side of the screen of life, saved every coin I could, working extra shifts to help her save money for her visa, her passport, her future. Last month, after years of the only communication being yellowed letters, I heard her clear voice over the phone. A miracle. "Bilal, you are my hero," she said, and in that moment my guilt, which had always whispered that I hadn't done enough, mixed with the relief and love I felt. I explained to her about my new faith, about baptism, the church, the path I was on. I spoke carefully, afraid that the change would take me away from the only family I had left. "I'm happy for you," she said, and I let out a breath, feeling that love cross the distance, forming a bridge between our worlds. It was Samuel who came up with the idea for the survivor support group, a safe place for men like me who carried secrets too heavy to bear alone. The meeting took place in a community center where the yellow walls warmed the room, the chairs formed a circle of trust, and the aroma of coffee mingled with the quiet hope that lived in each of us. I had been attending these meetings for months, hearing stories that reflected my own pain. Pakistanis, Somalis, Bangladeshis, each carrying their own ghosts. I had spoken bits and pieces of my story, my voice shaking as if each word were an open wound. But that night, something changed. I had agreed to share my full testimony on behalf of a charity fighting abuse in Pakistan's madrasas, not to hate, but to call for change. I stood up, my hair down and my beard trimmed, my hands finally steady, though my heart was pounding. The room was silent, 20 pairs of eyes fixed on me, kind eyes marked by scars similar to mine. "My name is Bilal Khan," I began, my voice low, each word carrying weight and truth. I told him about Lahore, about the dusty courtyard of the Madrasa, about Mulvi Rahim's dark hands that stole my innocence. I told him about my father's silence, the anger that consumed my soul, the drink that tried to bury my pain, and my desperate escape from the blasphemy that imprisoned me in Karachi. I shared Zanob's story, his courage, his escape, the reason I still breathed and fought. I talked about London, the little moments of light, the hot tea Samuel gave me, the hymns that rang out in the church, and the man in white who called me by name in my dreams. I hated Allah. I hated Islam, I said, my throat tight, because men use that faith to hurt me. But Jesus showed me love. Love, not judgment. I'm not whole, I confessed, but I am healing, and I want others to be healed too. Tears slid silently down my cheeks and theirs, filling the room with sobs and hope. A man hugged me afterward, his hands shaking and his voice soft. "You gave me courage." I nodded, my chest swelling with the knowledge that this was why I had survived. Hope for tomorrow, though small, was a relentless force, run by survivors like me and dedicated allies. Its office was a cluttered room in the White Chapel, a humble but determined workspace. I volunteered to help, writing letters to Pakistani officials, sharing my story online, always hiding my name to protect Zanob. The work was hard. The news from Pakistan weighed heavily on my chest. Madrasas still out of control, boys injured, the silence of the powerful. I learned that Mulvi Rahim had died, his heart failing as his crimes went unpunished in the eyes of the men who protected him. I felt no joy at his death, only a deep and strange sadness, and quietly, a prayer rose in my throat. A strange prayer for this man who had marked me forever. "Jesus, forgive him as you have forgiven me." Those words came out of me, half whispered, half silently shouted. Forgiveness did not erase the pain I had been carrying for so long, but it slowly brought unexpected relief. It was a weight I finally did not have to carry alone. In my notebook, which had once been filled with anger and despair, new words now appeared, full of hope and strength. Grace, I realized, was far more powerful than hate. I was not just my scars. I was more than the marks the past had left on me. And then, finally, Zanob arrived in London. Her visa was approved, my savings were enough to buy her ticket. Everything seemed to align like a miracle. I met her at Heathrow Airport and my heart couldn't stop pounding. She was older, sure. Time had taken its toll on her face, but her eyes, those big, bright eyes that had always been my star, were the same. Zanob wore a blue shalwar kameez, her long braid falling over her shoulder, and as we hugged, I felt my tears wet her scarf, while her shy laughter echoed like soft music amid the chaos of the arrival. "Bilal, you're so tall," she said, drawing a smile from me, a laugh that finally felt free and light. She moved in with me in a small, simple apartment, but it was ours, our refuge, our beginning. Her sewing machine hummed almost all day long, while her laughter filled every corner of the cramped space. Zanob began attending my church with that intense curiosity in her eyes. "Why Jesus, Bilal?" she would ask with sincerity and a touch of doubt. I told her about the dreams that came to me at night, about the peace I felt in my heart, about the love that didn't demand perfection or impossible sacrifices. She listened to me in silence, her eyes thoughtful, not yet ready to embrace all that, but never turning away. "I'm proud of you," she said on a cold afternoon, and in that moment my tears fell silently, healing a wound I had never been able to name. But all was not well. My father's letter arrived in the fall, its handwriting shaky, the words short and heavy. "Bilal, I'm sorry. Come home." My chest tightened with the memory of that slap, that crushing silence that rose like suffocating dust in my soul. Zanob read the letter with me, her face soft, full of understanding. "He's old, Bilal. He's lonely," she said. "Our mother has been gone for 2 years. His heart is weak." I couldn't forgive him completely, not yet, but I answered, my voice firm, though trembling inside. "I'm healing, Abu. And maybe one day I would be able to pray for him, asking for Jesus' grace, not for me, but for him. The church taught me a strange and powerful love for the broken, even those who had broken me. Aisha, the Nigerian woman who made the best jollof for community meals, once told me, "Forgiveness is for you, Bilal, not for them." I nodded, feeling the wisdom of those words light my way like a beacon in the darkness. Winter arrived in London, with its biting cold, but also with the streets lit up with Christmas lights, the scent of pine trees filling the air. I walked with Zanob down Brick Lane, surrounded by curry houses, their intense and welcoming aromas, and the colorful graffiti that told stories of resistance and hope. We ate nihari in a small tent, while we talked about Lahore, about the biryani our mother made, and about the dreams we still carry. Her dream was to open a shop, a place where she could be free. Mine was to keep telling stories, fighting so that no one would have to suffer in silence anymore. I saw Pakistanis praying in a mosque, their mats spread on the floor, their voices joined in prayer. I felt no anger, only a deep peace, a rest I had never known before. The boy I had been, lost in the shadows of the Madrasa, was finally finding some rest. The nightmares still came, but they were rare, almost silent. Mulvi Rahim's face was now just a distant shadow, while the light of Jesus shone brighter and brighter within me. I stood in church singing hymns with my voice loud and my heart open. Pastor Mary preached about purpose, her eyes searching mine as she said, "God uses our pain for good." I wanted to believe it with all my remaining strength. My life was living proof of that. Broken, but not destroyed. I worked with hope for tomorrow, planning a campaign for Pakistan, seeking justice and change. Zanob helped me create pamphlets, her clear laugh a song that filled our home with joy. We prayed together, not always to Jesus, but to a God we both sought, a God who might understand our doubts and fears. Her hands in mine, sharing the invisible scars that bound us together. In my notebook, I wrote no longer pain, but promise. I am Bilal, son of grace. My voice is my light. On a quiet night under the starry London sky, I stood on the balcony of our apartment, Zanob asleep inside. The air was cool, the city seemed to sleep, and the silence was broken only by the distant hum of the red buses. I thought of my mother, of her soft, tender hands, of my father, of his wounded pride, of Mulvi Rahim, of his unpunished sins. I thought of the boys who still suffered in the madrasas. Their silence was my silence. And I prayed, my voice clear and firm, "Jesus, use me. Heal them." I felt a gentle warmth, different from dreams, something real, as if a hand were resting on my heart. The scars were still there and always would be, but they didn't define me. I was Bilal, survivor, brother, son of grace. And my story? That one, yes, was just beginning. It was a light that I carried, a dawn that broke through the densest shadows.